let's actually dive into how we're going to conduct the due diligence and what's going on. The first part is you have to review that existing player contract obligation. Those are a little bit easier. Those are generally publicly available. And as you go through that due diligence process and sign the NDAs, you're going to get to take a look at these pretty much from the team level as well as the league level. Those are a little bit easier to figure out. The league will help in that process as you go through due diligence, but you also need to be able to conduct that on your own. So that way you and your client understand it. You're not just taking somebody's word for it from New York. You also, of course, have to take a look at any special obligations, such as like those performance benchmarks or injury clauses or endorsement restrictions. One of the biggest things that we see are that new owners don't necessarily understand the injury guarantees and what the insurance looks like and what the insurance payments are for those type of things. And sometimes those are the invoices and the bills that can slip through the cracks because they may not be necessary in other industries, whereas they are required and almost across the board used in sports simply because of the risk of injury is so big. Of course, with sponsorship deals, that's a huge revenue stream for teams, and you need to understand what the financial impact is on the team's revenue and how those are structured. It's not just a slapping your name on the side of the building type of a deal. Sometimes it's dependent on team performance. Sometimes it has to do with playoffs only. Well, what happens if you don't make the playoffs, right? Sometimes it's multi-year deals with companies that may not be around anymore. FTX is a good one where that was a Bitcoin exchange that went under, and they had huge sports deals all over the place, right? You need to understand all of those contract terms and the compliance. But one of the big parts is the lease agreements. And I mentioned that earlier, where not every team owns its arena. In fact, I think it's about 60% or so are actually in publicly financed stadium, and they're just the main tenant. Well, that can be problematic if you don't own your venue. That means you're beholden to somebody else, even if you're the one managing that arena. So you need to understand what the requirements are if you're in a publicly financed arena, but you've agreed to pay for the upkeep on that arena. Can you imagine? It's renting the place, but your upkeep may be $30 or $40 million a year to keep that billion-dollar basketball palace up and running. That can be really problematic and something that's a hidden cost that you may not otherwise see. Are you going to be able to renegotiate those as a new owner? Maybe, maybe not. It all depends on how the economy is, the local political scene, and a lot of very indicative factors of what's going on in not just society, but in each local community on what their financial status looks like. How valuable is that team to the community? It can get really, really hairy. You also want to take a look at what that practice facility looks like. Well, there's a trend to own those practice facilities for those teams. There are still some that are publicly financed. And while that's great, so you don't have to come out of pocket money, monetarily wise, at least to build it, you're going to have a lot of upkeep on it. And so when I'm dealing with team owners or potential team owners, that's always an early conversation about what does the practice facility look like, because that can be a big boon to the economy for your team if you're able to rent it out. You're able to have special events, what special events are allowed and not allowed. And of course, those vendor contracts, right? We're not just talking about the hot dog vendor or the food vendor. If Levy Restaurants is providing you all the food for your stadium, that's great. It's an easy review of a gigantic contract, right? But you're going to have those vendors for everything from T-shirts and the like giveaways at the front gate. You're going to have vendors for hospitality stuff, right? You're going to have vendors for security. You're going to have all sorts of vendors, including the upkeep on the facilities. And so it's really important to know what those are. Now, it's also important to understand the litigation risks, right? You need to identify what some of the legal risks are and what some of those liabilities are, because there could be some ongoing lawsuits. Again, you're inviting the public into a place, and then you're going to serve them alcohol, and you're going to have the liveliness of professional sporting events where people are going to get upset because their player on their fantasy team didn't hit a home run, and somebody is telling your player that they're not very good, and they're screaming right behind you, and you're upset with your home life, you're upset with your work life, and now we're swinging for the fences against fans from the other team, and you're going to have some of those ongoing lawsuits. You're going to have The frivolous lawsuits that still, you're going to have to send your lawyer out to handle. You're going to have all sorts of litigation when you're involved with a professional sports team. It's just going to happen. You also have to understand what those potential claims are, right? If you're buying a sports team and you know that there's a news story about the escalator malfunctioning and 15 people got thrown off that thing, when you buy that team, you good plaintiffs attorneys out there probably smell money that if they're going to spend $4 billion on a team, they can certainly pay your guy a couple $1 million. And so those potential claims need to be accounted for as well.